Ever feel like the resources and advice out there for women are missing something essential? I thought so too, which is why more than 6 years ago, I created She Said, She Said. I'm Laura Cox Kaplan, and after 3 decades in communications and then advocacy and now juggling motherhood and entrepreneurship, trust me, friend, I get it. Making a real impact takes more than just passion. It takes the right mindset, the right skills, the right investments, and the right community. On this show, we dive deep with incredible women from all walks of life who have been there. We uncover the secrets to building influence, navigating tricky relationships, and staying true to ourselves even when it's tough. And let's face it, it often is. I also throw in my own favorite productivity and life hacks, things that have shifted my perspective and might help you too. Wherever you are in your journey, my goal here is to leave you inspired to define success your way and to help you build the confidence you need to tackle your biggest goals. Subscribe today and let's unlock your full potential, your confidence, and your greatest influence. Hey friend, welcome back to She Said, She Said. So here we are. We are just a few days past a very contentious election where the polarized rhetoric fueled so much fear and dread and angst. It was just exhausting. Whether your particular candidate won or lost, you may find yourself dreading having to face or deal with those colleagues who you know have a different point of view. It is tempting to just avoid them altogether. And while that might work for a few days, obviously that approach is not sustainable over the long term. And when we just avoid each other, we also run the risk of losing the power and the benefit that comes from trying to understand our different points of view and of actually gaining the benefit of those diverse opinions in our organizations. So this week, rather than talk about the election, you have plenty of sources for that, I want to take what I hope will be a more constructive approach and actually share an encore episode with you. This episode is packed with so many useful tools and so much perspective on how to navigate those differences in the workplace. Last year, I welcomed Dr. Deb Mashek to the podcast. She is a social psychologist who is also an expert on how to bridge those seemingly impossible divides and our differences of opinion in the workplace. Now, a version of this week's episode actually posted last year, and it was one of my favorites, and it was a really popular one with listeners as well. At the time, Deb had just published her book entitled CollaborHATE, How to Build Incredible Collaborative Relationships at Work, Even If You'd Rather Work Alone. I love the title. So in this week's encore conversation, Deb shares her research and her personal experience on building relationships and even influencing people who might seem at first like they are on a completely different planet. We'll talk about why it's so crucial to create spaces where diverse ideas can actually clash, respectfully, of course, and how those clashes can spark incredible solutions. And here's another counterintuitive idea, actually leaning into discomfort, which Deb encourages. And let's face it, getting into a discussion with someone who looks at the world from a very different perspective from you can be very challenging. Deb gives us practical strategies for navigating those politically charged conversations so that we're better prepared to engage. Some of the themes that we discuss include the power of leaning into curiosity, the surprising strength of humility, and why those difficult conversations are actually some of the most important to have. Friend, this episode will give you so much to think about as you navigate the challenging post-election landscape and also the conversations that are likely to accompany it. Here is episode 309, an encore episode with Dr. Deb Mashek. And here's to connecting and collaborating and finding joy in our common ground. Enjoy. Deb, welcome to She Said, She Said.
It is such a delight to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so thrilled to have you. I have been looking so forward to this conversation because I got to cheat. You sent me an advance copy of this book, which I was really thrilled about. I had a chance to read it about a month ago. I love it. There is so
Oh.
much great information here. So I want to sort of start maybe from the beginning. Let's level set the stage and talk about collaboration and why it matters. I mean, we talk about it all the time, right? But just level set for the audience. Why? Why is it so important?
Well, it's interesting. We do talk about it all the time, and we often talk about it in this very hand wavy way of like, hey, we want more collaboration in the world. And
Right.
yes, I agree, it's a great thing. But why is it a great thing? It's because collaboration is what enables us to solve the world's trickiest problems, to innovate the most amazing solutions, the things that we don't even know we need yet in the world. And very few of these advances take place with just one person involved. It's like there are always other
Right.
people involved. And if there are ways of making collaboration less painful, more productive for everybody involved, sign me up because I think a lot of us, myself included, we see that collaboration is valuable, that we want to be doing it, that we quote should be doing it. But then when we actually get into the trenches of it, it can be a total slog. It can be really painful, a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of fallen projects and dashed expectations and ideas that just didn't come to fruition, not because it wasn't a good idea, but because the people who are engaged were not playing well together. And I am interested in figuring out how to unpack that and how to make it a more navigable tool that we can all use to have the sort of impact in the world that I know we can have.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The title of your book is called CollaborHATE. So the H is silent, but it essentially gets to this, to the pain points that are involved in collaboration. Why, in your view, Deb, and you have spent a ton of time, this is your background, you study this, why why do we not talk about those pain points as readily? Why is that not also kind of hand in glove, right? Yes, we need collaboration, but it's going to be really hard. Why don't we acknowledge that?
Yeah, there's some sort of kumbaya around collaboration. It's like all things togetherness. Yay, let's do this together. We're going to do a collab. And it's just this kind of default. Um, I've used the word around it before. There's some toxic positivity that around this
Right.
word collaboration. And somehow we're not allowed to talk about, and I don't really mean we're not allowed to, but we often seem to shy away from talking about the hard stuff. And so, yeah, I tucked the H in that title. Some people love the title, other people hate it. Great. At least they're talking about it. I'll take it. Um, but I want to kind of elevate that there are tricky parts, there are snags. And I don't know if I can't remember if we're going to mention this one, but we don't really teach people how to collaborate. And so there's this disconnect if we say it's important, it's clearly critical in the world, and yet it's largely invisible in our professional development. It's largely invisible in our students' experiences, whether it's in my my kiddo is now 13, but when he was 8, he came home with this horrible collaboration story from third grade. And I spent many years teaching college, and the college students are also not learning how to collaborate. And so there's this weird constellation of it's important, but we don't teach it. And I think it's because we think, oh, it's a social behavior, therefore people are either good at it or they're bad at it. It's a sink or swim sort of thing. And I just
Mm-hmm.
don't buy that at all. And so I feel like let's don't hide behind the rah collaboration is fabulous. Let's say like, yeah, sometimes it really sucks. Here's why and here's what we can do about it.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking about it as you're saying that. I'm thinking about that very famous book, Everything You Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten. And there are some really fundamental elements of getting along that you do learn in elementary school. But maybe to the point that you just made about the fact that we're not really taught how to collaborate, maybe talk about what's missing. What specifically are we not learning to do? Because we do learn sort of fundamental, getting along on the playground kind of stuff, but what's missing?
Well, can I say, I'm not sure we're teaching kids fundamental get along on the
Mm,
playground anymore because we're putting, playground supervisors and parents as like this mediator of how to play everywhere. So we're not really teaching the kids to figure out their own solutions to some of life's simpler challenges.
Isn't that
And oh
fascinating?
my gosh, I think we're really undermining the abilities of our future collaborators
Yeah.
by curating all of our kids' social experiences. But maybe we could talk on that in a little bit. But so we put, and I feel I'm pausing a little bit because I don't mean to equate workplace collaboration with what's happening in the third grade. So,
Right.
but there are some through lines. For example, we readily put people in groups and ask them to do things, whether it's the group project in the college class where you need to give a presentation, or at, obviously at work, we're in groups all the time. So it's not the absence of group work that's the problem. It's the absence of kind of deconstructing the behavior. So in college, for instance, I spent 14 years as a professor out at Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California. And, the students would do group work, but then they in terms of deciding how to proceed with that group work, they would almost always default to what's a divide and conquer strategy. So
Mm.
here, I'll take the introduction, you take the methods, you take the data analysis, and we'll try to throw everything together and create something that looks like a discussion. That is absolutely a form of group work, but it's a form of group work where you don't really get those emergent properties of the truly spectacular things that could happen. We might say, oh, you need to be a good communicator. And communication is one of the places where we see a decent amount of professional development, but we
Mhm.
don't necessarily see conversations around how do you address it when somebody has dropped the ball? So somebody said they were going to do this thing and they show up to the next meeting and they haven't done it. How do you have that accountability conversation that truly holds them accountable, but also doesn't derail the relationship for the future together work that you need to do? And so there are just
Right.
all these other ways or other pieces that come into play for collaborating well that seem to be absent. And I think one of the reasons we're not teaching it is because, well, I mentioned the sink or swim thing, that we think you're either good at it or you're bad. And I think the other thing is we have people who are leading organizations who are teaching the students who themselves haven't been taught how to collaborate. So you have a lot of people just kind of guessing how to do it, or you have people who are incredible at it but can't necessarily point to why they're incredible at it. What is it that's making it possible for them? So we end up with this very, I think of it as like this black box of, yeah, go collaborate well, but we're not sure what's inside the box to make that happen.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's so incredibly fascinating. So fascinating. Okay, recognizing that we only have so much time with you, unfortunately, but if we maybe get us started with where do you start, right? You just mentioned like sort of the default position oftentimes with a project, and you mentioned college students, but I would argue this also happens in the corporate world as well. Okay, you do that, I'll do this, you do that, I'll do this, because in some respects it's kind of geared toward conflict avoidance. Like you sort of at the upfront, you're saying let's sort of avoid conflict if we can because we know that's likely to maybe jeopardize the project. How should we be starting when you put this group of people together? Maybe they know each other, maybe they don't, and they've got to work toward a solution. Where do you start?
Yeah, so I want to give a shout out here to Leanne Davy. She has this fabulous book, The Good Fight,
Mm-hmm.
about the critical importance of conflict in our organization. So just this mindset, and my thinking on this has really been advanced by her. This mindset of our job is to be in conflict within our organizational teams. That doesn't mean fighting. It means though that we are each advocating for a position, that we have a responsibility to the organization to tug in productive tension on the possibilities to find the most optimal solution. So that's really cool. There's that piece. And then, when I step into an organization, I'm coming in as a social psychologist. So the big question on my mind, or I should say the big framework, is that behavior is always a function of who that person is and the environment that they're in. So that's my lens. So I right away start looking about, do we have collaborative individuals who, first of all, have the right skills or, around like the communication thing or basic time management or basic project management. I'll even notice things like, oh, here's somebody who just got assigned an action item in the meeting and they're not writing it down anywhere. That's interesting to me because I'm curious, how are they going to be able to follow through on that? And it might be
Right.
a behavior I'll point out to them later. So those are personal sorts of things.
Hmm.
Then I want to start looking at the environment in which those people exist. And there are lots of layers to environment. And these are the different influences on those people that give rise to those collaborative behaviors. So, one of the first, and this is what the book is all about, one of the most proximal of those influences are the relationships that we're in. Are they high quality relationships? Is the work structured in a way that really leverages interdependencies and your behavior and my behavior to give rise to these shared consequences or outcomes? So, looking at the relationships among people as part of that context, and then taking a kind of the next layer of those environmental influences is, does this team or this organization employ tools and processes that actually enable collaborative action? So it could be their project management approach. It could be, wow, they say they love collaboration, but it's on their letterhead, but I'm not actually seeing them celebrating that anywhere too. And so then I'm starting to touch on the next layer out, which is organizational culture. So there are
Hmm.
all these fireflies when you walk into an organization that are signaling to you, like their little booties are flashing, saying like, we value collaboration or we don't. And it's way more complex than looking to see, does the word collaboration show up as one of the value words at the bottom of the letterhead? Like that's like pretty much irrelevant. If when you walk in, you can look at things like their vendor contracts, and their vendor contracts offload all of the risk of that work together on the vendor. Like, I worked with this one client who the contract they sent to me, the indemnification clause was basically saying I can't sue them. And I said, so what about reciprocally? Can you sue me? And the answer is like, well, that's, this contract is to protect us. I'm like, no, the contract is about how it's going to guide our relationship. So I'm not willing to sign this because you're ignoring my interest, which is totally against my spirit. And so you can
Yeah.
look at things like, um, if you look at the infrastructure of an organization, you can look at, is collaboration even possible? If you start looking at the interfaces that are in place for how people work together, you can identify if collaboration is easy. And then you start looking at the way people are actually working together, their communities, what gets celebrated in the newsletter, and you start to realize whether or not collaboration is normative. And
Hmm.
then you can, I love this one, start looking at what actually gets rewarded
Yeah.
within the work to figure out if collaboration is rewarding. So the incentives, people will often say, we love collaboration. It's so important to us. We're very collaborative. But then you look at, well, what are the bonuses based on? What is promotion based on? And it's often on individual performance.
Right.
And, any parent or pet owner is going to tell you that what gets rewarded gets repeated. So if you
Mm.
say you want collaboration, but you only are rewarding competitive behaviors, guess what? You're going to get competitive behaviors. So that gives you a sense of like all those different layers and what you could be thinking about when you're looking to improve collaborative behavior.
Yeah. You know what? I'm struck by what you just said, especially as it relates to organizations that reward risk taking, right? And taking risks would potentially be an example of rewarding collaboration or evidence of collaboration. Because my guess is it may be difficult to sort of find those specific benchmarks to know how do you reward collaboration. Am I right about that?
Yeah, yeah, and I think the risk-taking insight is brilliant. I mean, I feel like just over the past five years, maybe everyone's like, "Yeah, we like to fail fast," and we're a place where people can take risks. But as soon as somebody does take a risk and they stumble, then it's hands up. Oh my gosh, you've destroyed our timeline. What are we gonna do? And it becomes chaos, and you learn really quickly. Like, actually, we don't reward risk. We don't reward risk taking. We reward safety and predictability.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Deb, let's talk about when one of these collaboration groups goes sideways and you end up with hurt feelings or, maybe a breach of trust, something along those lines. Talk about how you go about getting it back on track.
Yeah, so if I say I'm in charge of creating a new team, I invest really heavily on establishing firm relationship quality before I even get into any of the working stuff, because you need high quality relationships in order to have the context for the shared work to be effective. So in this situation where that you just brought up, where there's been, say, a trust violation, or somebody did drop the ball, or somebody's now stealing credit for somebody else's work, all of those things are signaling you've got a relationship quality problem that, for me, becomes, we have to address this first before we continue doing the together work, before we continue like chugging along with the task list and the Gantt charts and all of that stuff. And if we fail to fix that relationship quality, we're putting ourselves, our projects, our teams, our organizations at risk. And so, first of all, still pause and say, this is worth unpacking. Hopefully, this is one of those basic skills. People have the ability to say, here's the impact of that behavior on me. Here's what I'm experiencing. To share, here's the story I'm telling myself. I know I'm not supposed to jump to conclusions, so I'm just going to own my mind did it. Here's the story I'm telling myself. What have I got wrong here? What am I overlooking? What do I not know about? And importantly, what are we going to do next time to prevent this? And what amends, perhaps, like if somebody's stealing credit, and sometimes people still like sometimes it's intentional and gross and malicious, and you want to strangle that person for being a jerk. Other times it's, oh my gosh, we were really in that brainstorming session and I totally lost my sense of self versus you. And I couldn't remember whose fabulous idea that was. I just, I didn't mean to take credit for it. I said, that was my bad. How are you going to fix it? I'm going to go back to that audience, or at least to the person who invited me, and say, you know what, I failed to give full credit to my collaborators who did this thing, and are we going to make repairs, and what does that look like? And by the way, that practice of signaling how other people were involved is one of the things that gives us individual credibility, because we are demonstrating to our other future potential collaborators that we're somebody who values our relationships and the ideas and the perspectives and the resources of other people. I got to say, if somebody's doing that, I'm noticing, because I want to go work with them. I want to be part of their team.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about at some point. Let me find my note here because I've lost my place. It's this idea of really building a relationship by being authentic with, when someone asks you, how are you doing? That you're honest about how you're doing, and you're authentic and you're vulnerable. Talk about maybe where the line is, because when I read that, I thought, yes, that's great advice, but I also have been on the side where sometimes people naturally share a bit more, and sometimes people share too much. So
Yep.
where is the line of knowing when you're potentially sharing to the point of undermining your credibility and maybe the quality of the relationship, versus sharing in a way that allows you to be vulnerable, that allows you to be authentic, and that helps you build that connection? Give us some advice on how to do that.
I love this question, because I actually I'm finding myself choking on the word authenticity these days, because
I
I
know
feel
it's overused.
it's
I apologize.
no, but I love the spirit of it, but it seems to have moved to this place of like, oh, say whatever's on your mind, say
Yes.
whatever you want, whatever emotions you're feeling, just spill them out and ask other people to carry those. And for me, to your question, I start to think about, well, what are the environmental constraints that are necessary here? For example, what are my roles and responsibilities in this particular group at this time? That they don't need to know what I did all weekend. They said, how was your weekend? I can answer that in 30 seconds. And I honestly feel like 30 seconds is about the right amount of time. If somebody says, how are you? We should be able to take 30 seconds of disclosure is perfectly appropriate. If you're answering it in under 2 seconds, that's on you. You are undermining the quality of your relationships right there by not being more forthcoming. So there's that. Some of the other constraints are to think about what is the history of this relationship. So if this is the first time you've met someone, share something about your weekend, to be real about it, but don't go into necessarily that you had your pet died or something like that. That might be maybe more emotional or more personal for you, because what you want to look for is reciprocal self-disclosure. So
Mm.
I share, you share, I share, you share, and you want it to be escalating. So maybe the first time we talk, we share something about the, oh, it was a horrible commute to bed, because I was stuck in traffic, I got to listen to the entirety of the She Said podcast or something like that. So it's a disclosure. You have signaled what one of your interests is this podcast. You've signaled that you are frustrated, and you've also kind of signaled that you have a positive outlook, that you were able to turn a negative into a positive. Great.
Yeah.
Um, Next time I see you, I might also mention that I'm having a bit of frustration on the team or something like that. So it moves up, and we know that this reciprocal, escalating self-disclosure is one of the things that creates interpersonal closeness, that helps engender trust. It helps promote resource sharing, and it's such a simple thing to do. And so, if you're showing up to the meeting 5 minutes early, whether it's in the conference room or in the Zoom room, turn the dang camera on, have some informal conversation. This is a chance to connect, to start to build that fabric of community that we rely on to get amazing things done together.
I love that. I love that. That's so great. Deb, let's talk about influence, which is a thread that runs throughout this podcast and all of my conversations. And, recognizing you may have a very different view of influence. I tend to think that collaboration and the quality of our relationships is really important for influence. But maybe give me your thoughts on how collaboration and your work relates to maybe helping a person build and sustain more influence.
Yeah, I suspect we're actually fairly aligned here. So if we go back to that behavior as a function of the person and the environment thing, you can absolutely influence other people's behavior by having that proximal influence of being in positive relationship with them. So that's step one, is that how people act, how they show up. It's our responsibility, but I think all of us know that that changes a little bit depending on who else is there, depending on the context. So that's, to me, like the most basic way that our relationships influence or exert influence. Okay. The biggest way is if we think about the ways that we're creating and being and showing up, whether it's in the workplace, at home, out there in our civic organizations, at the neighborhood watch, at the parent teacher association. If I play well with others
Mhm.
and I'm not the jerk that people run away from because I'm bristly and can't seem to coordinate anything with anybody, my influence is necessarily limited, because, as we said at the top of our conversation, the most amazing innovations, creations, solutions to shared problems, they are absolutely bubbling up in relationships. So we need to know how to be in relationships so that we can exert influence on the important things that are happening in the world. So I think, I'm a relationships researcher, so totally biased, but I think relationships are the ultimate influence out there.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. There's another thread that I'm sort of hesitating whether I should bring this up, but I think it's so fundamental, and it was one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast in the first place. And that is that we're so divided, we're so polarized as a country and as a world, and people have really lost the ability to get along, to have conversations that might be, quote unquote triggering or upsetting in some way, and that they can't find that middle ground. Maybe talk, even more big picture, beyond the organizations, beyond like our personal relationships, sort of how this work fits into that broader context.
Yeah, so I'm of the opinion that none of us has cornered the perceptual market, that somehow our vantage point or our viewpoint alone is whole, or that it's correct, or that it's the one everybody else should have. So I come at the from the very foundation of I am a limited human, singular person. I know that I can't know it all, see it all, do it all, be it all, period. That's true in the workplace and it's true everywhere beyond. Because of that, that means that to be my most effective, influential, knowledgeable self, I have got to be in partnership and in relationship with other people who ideally, in my mind, see the world from a different vantage point. So you can imagine, I've got this coffee cup on my sitting here on my desk, and you can imagine if I put that cup on the desk and I don't, I'm from another world. I don't know that there's this thing called a coffee cup, but I look at it, I can only see one angle. I can only describe the characteristics from this one vantage point. And imagine I'm frozen in space and time and I can't move around it to look at another angle. It means that the only way for me to fully understand this object is if there are other beings surrounding it who can tell me what they're seeing. So kind of, crazy to think about in terms of a coffee cup, but what if we think about it in terms of how to solve poverty or how are we going to innovate the big solution? It's through being in relationship and through being in relationship with people who see the world differently that we become able to do that. So it really, for me, opens the door to two qualities in particular. One is curiosity. I have two favorite questions. One of them is how do you see it? The other is how might we? But relevant to this, how do you see it so that we don't assume other people are seeing the world the same way we do? Um, and then the second quality is intellectual humility. So knowing that, I don't see it all. There's no way I can possibly see it all. So those two values of curiosity and intellectual humility bring us into relationships, I think, very constructively with people who see the world differently, because rather than seeing them as an adversary or as somebody who's going to trigger us or as somebody who I need to go convince that they're, I'm right, you're wrong. Instead, it becomes somebody that I can explore the world with. And my understanding of the world will be enriched because I got to do that with them.
I love that. I really love that. Um, you have a very interesting background, and I know you share in the beginning of the book a bit about why collaboration became such an important theme in your life. Can you share with us a bit of your origin story and kind of how you got here?
Yeah, so the book opens with the line, let's see if I can get it right. The trailer park, my parents' alcoholism, and my PhD. These were my three great teachers of collaboration. And I didn't know it at the time. So this is admittedly a retrofitted thematic identification, if that makes sense. But I,
It
I grew
does.
up. Okay, I grew up in a double wide trailer, and by growing up, I guess I was there from I think probably age 2, maybe age 1, um, up through 5th grade. So the formative childhood years,
Mhm.
and it was a double wide trailer, North Platte, Nebraska. And there were really two big rules. One was because, it was one of those spaces where the kids would just kind of spill out in the morning and the parents would be at work or would stay inside. But the two big rules were you don't leave the chain link fence that surrounded the trailer park. So there were clear boundaries of where you could
Mhm.
go and not go. And if somebody was seriously hurt, then you went and got a parent. And by seriously hurt, the example that I remember very clearly was, one of the kids jumping off of a tin shed to try to catapult another kid and landed on a board with a nail in it and
Oh
like
God.
it like hit him. So he was like bleed. I mean, that was clearly like, oh, maybe we should have known better. So, this is not necessarily the way that you protect all injury, but
Right.
those were the two rules. And what's amazing about it is it meant that as kids, we had opportunity after opportunity to develop our muscle of being in relationship with others, of figuring out what are we going to play? How are we going to play it? What rules do we want to use today? If somebody violates the rules, what are we going to do about it? What are the consequences for them so that they don't do it again, but also so that they'll play with us again in the future? So, how do you walk that line of holding your own interest and the interest of other people in this constructive tension? Maybe it's about like you learn how to take turns, or it's about, well, I suppose we could add that rule, sure. And so, it was a very cool play mat to be on in terms of figuring out how to play well with others. So that was the trailer park piece. And then this one is, a little bit perverse in the sense of, I think my parents' alcoholism also taught me a lot about how to rely on relationships, because one of the things that anyone who grows up amid addiction figures out is the adults in the space are not necessarily able to provide. They don't necessarily track other people's interests like the kids' interest, nor are they able to provide for those interests or be responsive to them. And so, it's kind of unfortunate, obviously unfortunate, but like that, kids sometimes grow up with a lot of deprivation and neglect, but they still often are survivors and thrivers. And one of the ways I did that, and I didn't set out, like I didn't have a notebook with me trying to figure out what are the ways I could get affection and attention and security and, food sometimes, things like that. It's not like I was being calculated of, oh, I should go turn to my teachers and my friends' parents and whatnot. But somehow my younger self figured that out. And I had all these other adults outside of my home who did take me under their wing and who provided for, really, there were absolutely food moments, and there were absolutely transportation moments and clothing moments and things like that. But they just took care of me. And I am so grateful that whatever I was doing at the time, that I was attracting their attention and affection and care, because I turned out just fine, and I'm very grateful for that. And it's everybody from, teachers and, yeah, my friends' parents and youth group leaders. If I close my eyes for 10 seconds, 100 names pop up of people who had this positive influence. So I point to that as, as part of my understanding of why relationships are so important and why I wanted to learn about them in graduate school, where I got to go on and, it was never assumed that I would go to college, much less graduate school. And even that story, it points to a high school guidance counselor who saw real potential and opportunity for me and helped me get there. But when I got to grad school and realized there was this whole field that you could study, the psychology of relationships, I totally fell in love. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's amazing. What an incredible story. That is really incredible. I know you also went on to help, I believe you're a founding member of the Heterodox Academy. Maybe talk a bit about that. I've been fascinated by it since I first learned about it. Talk about what that is and why, sort of how that fits into your broader work.
Yeah, so it was after the 2016 election that Heterodox Academy came on. So it had existed as a informal group of professors who were concerned about the absence of viewpoint diversity in the academy, and in particular in their research, and that there were
Mm.
certain questions that seemed to be off limits, that if you asked them, you were going to get all sorts of negative attention from colleagues, from the press and whatnot. But it wasn't until after the 2016 election that I became aware that there was this group of people doing this. But what I had noticed on campuses is that people were melting down, that even though, a large proportion of people had, in fact, voted for Donald Trump, but on campus, everyone was like, oh my God, I had no idea this was even a remote possibility. I don't know anybody who is interested in Donald Trump. I myself, not a supporter of Donald Trump, but I was very concerned, like, wait a second, that means that we are so disconnected with different viewpoints that are there. What does that mean? And,
Right.
I heard things happening where, I more conservative colleagues, for instance, had come to my office and closed the doors and shared that they were excited about these results, but that they felt like they couldn't say anything on campus because they were going to lose their jobs or something like that. And it's like, oh man, what are we doing? I'm really worried that we cannot talk about these different viewpoints. Thinking back to what I was just saying about the value of engaging with people who have different perspectives. And so I decided to teach this class the next semester called I'm Right, You're Wrong, about the psychology of viewpoint diversity. And it was going to be a course for first year students. It's one of their writing courses. And, we decided, or I decided, I wanted to read Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. And I wanted
Right.
the students to read Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Visions, and that we would just figure out, like, what do we think about this whole viewpoint diversity thing? And it was a freshman course, but a senior saw it in the catalog. And he came up to me and he said, Prof. Mashek, I'm super excited for your class. And I said, Ron, awesome. But the thing is you're a senior, so you can't really take it without missing a beat. He said, but you'll teach it to me independent study, right? Okay, yeah, let's do it. So he ended up being like my co-teacher for developing this class. He's the one who told me about Heterodox Academy. And I read the website, fell in love with this idea of, yeah, of course we need different perspectives. Yeah, so I became a member. And then a couple months later, it was in the summer, this email comes across from Jonathan Haidt saying that they were looking for their first executive director. Now, mind you, I'm a tenured full professor at an amazing institution, my absolute dream job that I love. But when I saw that email, I was, oh my gosh, I need to apply for this. I want to go be part of the solution. Long story short, I got the job. I moved cross country as a single mom with an 8-year-old in tow. I leave the sector that I've known of higher ed. I move into, I guess it's, I would say Heterodox Academy is still and obviously higher ed, but now I'm leading a national nonprofit. I'm putting the organs in the organization, and it just, the mission of that organization lights my heart up, because it really is about, if we're at a university or a college, the whole point of those institutions is the creation and exploration of ideas and knowledge. And if we're going to do that, we've got to be able to tolerate unpopular opinion. We have to be able to ask difficult questions of data, of ourselves, of the social world we're embedded in. And we need to be able to do it in a way where it's okay to do. We're not going to lose our jobs over it. And so I enjoyed really digging into that mission for 3 years. Got the organization. I say I put the organs in the organization. We got it launched. We got its 501c3 status, and created membership, like membership structures and all of these great things. And I'm no longer employed by the organization, but I still obviously follow their work and am excited about the good work they're doing out there in the world.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's incredibly important work, and it does feel like it's a very high mountain. it's it's a very big challenge that feels like it's only getting bigger. It's really, I think it's too big of a question to try to tackle here unless you have like some, kind of quick responses to what should change. I mean, how should people be thinking about this problem? Because the idea to me of not having diversity of thought and opinion in the classroom, whether it's in high school, middle school, elementary school, certainly in college, like it blows my mind that we're even having this conversation, and yet it's a really big conversation and it's a really big problem. What do we do?
So for me, this connects directly to collaboration. So first of all, chin up and look and figure out who the other people are who are advocating for this, and go into community with them, and share ideas, and share the resources, share the pain, share the frustration, because all of that is real. And there are we when I was at Heterodox Academy, we needed to figure out what is our bumper sticker for this organization. And one of our members reached out and said, you know what it is? It's that great minds don't always think alike. And so that's what's all over the HXA website now. And it comes
Love
from one of
that.
the members. But it's absolutely true. Like there's so many people out there who do have this perspective, who don't necessarily think that they can raise their hand to say that they have their perspective. And so finding these communities where it exists, whether it's HXA or a ton of other organizations, like I'm thinking of the How Do We Fix It podcast, or the Uncommon Ground group. There are these groups talking about it. So go find them, share their resources. And then I think, sorry, I lost the thread of your question. What was
Oh,
the,
I was asking, what do we do? I mean, this is a huge problem. What do we do to try to fix it? I mean, we can each take individual responsibility, but what do you advise?
for me, it's about forming the community and taking collective action. And I'll even say I was at a parent teacher association. No, it wasn't. It was a meeting the other day on school safety for middle schoolers. And I was like, yeah, I want to keep my kids safe. I'm going to go listen to this. And so it was a Zoom call where, yeah, I'm the only one with my camera on as usual. I got to say, I think we need to turn our cameras back on whenever possible. It's so hard as a presenter to be talking to a bunch of square boxes and getting no feedback. So anyway, I take it as my personal responsibility to just show up to these meetings with my dang camera on. But one of the ideas that came up is like, oh, we make sure you're telling your kids don't talk to strangers. And I felt inside, I'm like, that is the worst advice. And so I raise my hand and take personal responsibility for bringing another viewpoint into the space. Is it going to improve the world? I don't know, but I felt like I can't sit back and be the person who just swallows that advice. And I was like, I'm going to offer a counter perspective, which is I think we need to teach our kids that it's okay to talk to strangers. It's okay to connect with people that you didn't know before. You don't talk to strangers who give you the creeps or who are sending off your spidey sense. Like, yeah, still pay attention to how am I feeling and honor those boundaries that's signaling for you. But the idea that we're communicating to our kids that the world is filled full of danger and dangerous people who are out to get you, as like, I don't think we're doing them a long-term favor in terms of their ability to develop into competent and confident humans that our world needs. And so it was like just this little tiny moment of viewpoint diversity, of bringing in another perspective, not to shove it on anybody else, but to say, hey, look, there's another way of looking at it. Sure enough, one of those other parents who was in the black box, who I couldn't see, texted me and said, thank you for bringing that up. There's an awful lot of parental protectionism, and I'm wondering what the consequences for our kids. So we found each other because I took the risk of putting myself out there. And I think whether it's in higher ed, in our elementary schools, inviting the conversation with questions is one of the great strategies. So again, being curious. How are other people seeing this, or say, I don't know, maybe I'm the oddball out, but I'd like to share another perspective, can open those doors a little bit. And if nothing else, it tells everybody else not to assume everyone's thinking the same way as them.
Yeah. Oh, Deb, that's so great. I have loved this conversation. We could talk for a long, long time, and hopefully I can have you back again, because this has been fantastic. I've learned a lot. I know my audience will really appreciate this as well. So thank you for the time. I know you're super busy with the book tour. Again, the book is called CollaborHATE. I've included a link in the show notes where folks can buy the book. Deb, thank you again.
My absolute pleasure. And I have to say, I know that your listeners are listening to this. They can't see us, but we are both totally surrounded by the same orange. And so I have been loving that while we're talking. So thank you for inviting me on and for giving me the chance to talk about these ideas that are so near and dear to my heart. And I absolutely think these are the things that help us as women have that influence and positive impact on the world.
Amen. Love it. Thank you, Deb. Okay, friend, I'd love to know what you thought about this episode, so be sure to send me some feedback. You can also get a copy of Deb's terrific book. I've included a link in the show notes where you can purchase it. In addition, be sure to connect with me on social media. You'll find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook at Laura Cox Kaplan, or you can send me some feedback in the form of an email. You'll find me at info@shesaid.media. In the meantime, friend, have a great rest of your week. Take care, and I'll see you soon. And remember, She Said podcast is a weekly production of She Said Media.